if you look online, you'll see a lot of lists of what the top programming languages to learn are. And so today I took the various lists that I could find, and we're going to go over what's widely agreed on as the top 10 programming languages, what kind of companies use them, and what kind of job you can expect to get from them. Let's take a look. First on our list, and maybe unfairly grouped together, is going to be C and C++. Now those are actually very different programming languages. C was created in 1972. C++ actually, people began working on it in the 70s, and it was officially released and codified in 1998. What are you going to get from these? These two are known for speed, and that's primarily the biggest benefit you get from them. You're managing your own memory, you're basically managing everything with them, but what you gain from that is immense speed. So the majority of what you're going to see in C and C++ jobs are going to be operating system levels, but also game engine levels. So you're going to see some other games are actually written, a lot of games are written by some other big languages, but C and C++ still play a huge role in the gaming industry, as well as on the operating system level, and even on some highly scalable websites. eBay is actually largely written on C++, and one of the big reasons for that is because at a scale that big, you need to be as fast as possible. And even Facebook, while originally built in PHP, does run quite a bit on C++ as well, primarily for the speed. So what are you going to look at here? You're going to look at operating system level development, Internet of Things development, game engine development, and highly scaled website development. Next up, we have Java. Now, what you're going to find with these languages is that they actually all sprang about from somebody trying to solve a problem. And so what you saw with Java was somebody trying to take C++ and abstract that to something that was easier for developers to work with, but also with the Java runtime was able to run on virtually any platform, and that was the goal behind it. Java was first developed in 1995, which actually came before C++ was officially said, here's what C++ is. And before then, Java sprang about. You're going to find two types of companies running on a Java platform. Either a company that's been around for a long time and is widely used in that industry. For example, there's a lot of healthcare companies that run on Java. There's some decent number of banking industries that run on Java. It's mainly going to be older, well-established companies that have probably years or even decades of code base behind it. The only time you're going to see a startup using Java is if the founder was the programmer and that was the language that he knew. And so he's going to go with what he knows best. So what are you going to get with Java? Probably a B2B business or something in healthcare. It's probably going to be a larger business and probably something well established. The other type of development you're going to get with Java is actually Android development. Android development is based on Java, and while Kotlin is gaining ground, having Java will mean any company that wants to produce an Android application and is not going with a single language that covers all mobile devices is going to have a need for a Java developer. So there is future there potentially. PHP. There's a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth when PHP is included on top programming lists. And there's good reason for that. PHP allows you to write horrendous code, but that doesn't mean you have to. PHP can also produce very good quality code, and PHP has actually gotten much faster. It was created in 1994 as basically a way for somebody who was trying to build one of the first dynamic websites, and he wanted to display data and have some functionality built into the website. So what are you going to find with PHP? A lot of people will still say, you know, a giant percentage of the internet actually runs on PHP. Now that is true. I will say though that the majority of that is Older code bases, things like WordPress, some of the other CMS frameworks, they're kind of dying out. Joomla, some of that kind of stuff, that's really going away. But WordPress still has a huge market share. So what kind of company are you going to work at with PHP? Now, famously, the original Facebook was written on PHP. So that's not to say you can't build good stuff with it. What kind of company are you going to get who uses PHP? It's probably going to be a smaller company. It's probably going to be a leaner company. It may be, once again, where the founder knew PHP and that's what they built it on. But the other thing is ease of access. PHP, out of all these languages, is probably the easiest to get a website hosted with. You can pretty much run PHP on any Linux server out there, and let's face it, the internet runs on Linux. So you have a lot of benefit there, but the way it's viewed by most developers is probably going to limit the number of companies you'll actually find using it these days. Python. Python has seen a huge renaissance in the last 10 years. Python was actually developed in 1989, and it's still around today. And there's good reason for that. Python is an amazing language, and you can do so much stuff in it. There's decades of libraries for it. But what kind of job are you going to find using Python? Most web development is not done in Python. There are some companies that still develop in Python. Famously, Reddit was developed in Python. But again, that is a founder who knew Python, and that's the tech stack that they decided to go with. But the majority of jobs out there are not going to be web development jobs. The majority of jobs out there are big data and data science, as well as artificial intelligence and machine learning. So if you're going with Python and you're looking for a job, you need to know big data, you need to know machine learning, you need to know math. What kind of company is going to use this? So many companies are using machine learning and artificial intelligence now that you're not really limited in that area. What you're more limited to is the type of job, and that's probably going to be, once again, machine learning and artificial intelligence. JavaScript. So JavaScript was stuffed into the browser way back when just to try to give a web page some kind of functionality beyond static content. Now, JavaScript is actually a little harder to codify what kind of job you're going to get, because you don't just need to know JavaScript, you need to know a framework. And what do I mean by that? On the back end, you're going to have Node. Node was developed in 2009, and I would say about 4 or 5 years ago really saw an explosion of interest. And that's because as websites became more dynamic, the desire to be able to use the same language on the front end and the back end grew, and out of that came Node. So Node is great in the sense that you can build just about anything on the back end with Node. On the front end, though, plain vanilla JavaScript almost isn't enough anymore. You really have to know either Angular, React, or Vue these days. So you have a couple of frameworks on the front end, and you have Node on the back end. So the frameworks on the front end, every company is going to have a website. So if you're a front-end developer only, any company will hire you, but the number of companies that want to hire only a front-end developer is shrinking. So you really, if you're going the JavaScript route, owe it to yourself to learn Node as well. And that will actually get you quite a number of job openings. 4 or 5 years ago, it was all startups using Node, but now Node has spread to all kinds of companies in every industry because of its reputation for speed of development and, I don't want to say ease of learning, but most developers know JavaScript for the front end, so it's easy to transfer that to Node on the back end. But Node is still a framework, and on top of that, you're still going to need to know something else like Express to do the actual web server. So you're going to see a combination of slightly older companies who have brought Node in, and that's actually not a bad place to be, because if a larger company is using Node, it means they're not locked in to their ecosystem and they're looking at other technologies, as well as you will find startups that are using Node because of its reputation. Ruby on Rails. So Ruby on Rails is not a language. Ruby is the language. Ruby on Rails is the framework. That being said, Ruby was not well known until Ruby on Rails was developed and released. So Ruby itself was actually developed in 1995, and Ruby on Rails was developed in 2004. Ruby on Rails exploded on the scene, and that was partially because it came on at the time that the MVC framework was popularized, and they were one of the main reasons why it was popularized. And if you've ever developed websites prior to MVC, you know what a pain that was and what a hassle that could have been, and MVC made web development so much easier. Now, who's going to be developing Ruby on Rails these days? Not a lot. And the reason for that is Ruby itself is quite slow. So while it popularized the framework, not long after that, everybody else developed a framework in MVC, and nearly every language has an MVC framework that you can use these days. So most of the jobs that you're going to get for Ruby on Rails are, I hate to say it, legacy code and people who started in Ruby on Rails and haven't shifted over to something else. If you don't know Ruby on Rails, I don't know that it's the best route to take. .NET. Now, .NET is a huge ecosystem. It's not a single language. It encompasses F#, C#, VB.NET, but they are all part of that same ecosystem, and they're all going to be similar in what you're going to find. Now, there used to be an old saying in IT, no IT manager ever got fired for buying Microsoft. And that was very true for a long time. So what kind of company and job are you going to get using .NET? .NET is business.
Lord business.
Now, you're going to see a lot of B2B. You're going to see almost every industry is going to have a segment of it using Microsoft's .NET platform. And a lot of the reason for that is .NET is supported by a large company, Microsoft. It's guaranteed to have support. It's not going anywhere, and it's solid. And it is almost a safe choice because of that. So you're going to find probably a corporate structure or a company that wants to have solid footing beneath it but doesn't want to have old technology. I've been developing primarily .NET for the last 16 years, and the way .NET Core and .NET 5 is going, it's going to be around for years and years to come. It is a safe bet to be a .NET developer. Now we're starting to get into the newer territories, and probably right now some of the most exciting territories for developers. Our first in this list is going to be Scala. Now, Scala is actually interoperable with the Java framework. It was actually written in response to Java and in a way trying to fix the problems that Java had with it. It actually does run in the JavaScript in the Java runtime environment. Scala is much faster than Java, but it can be written in an object-oriented way or in a functional programming way. And some of its benefits lend itself highly to a fintech, financial industry type of company. I would say on this list, it's probably one of the least used here, but also one of the most loved. So you're probably going to either find yourself working for a startup or in the financial tech industry. And neither of those places are a bad place to be. Rust. Rust was actually developed within the Mozilla organization, the company that makes Firefox. Rust is widely loved by developers, and there's a lot of good reason for that. It is fast, on the order of C++ fast. Not only that, but it's much easier to use, having been written 30 years after C and C++. It also ensures safe, let's call it, behavior, because it won't compile if it sees certain things that could cause problems. There's actually a lot of IoT development being done, and in fact, there are parts of the Linux operating system that are being rewritten in Rust. Another 5-10 years, the entire Linux kernel may be in Rust at that point. But we'll see what happens there. Now, you're probably going to see newer companies using Rust or companies that are highly concerned with high scalability. However, it seems to shift less to the web development side and more to the OS side of things. So Internet of Things, operating systems, stuff that needs to be highly scalable. And last but not least, on our list of languages is Go. It's commonly referred to as Golang, partially because try doing a Google search for Go. So Go was built in 2009 by Google, by a Google engineer. It was built to be fast to write and fast to run, but also simple. It doesn't have a lot of frills. It doesn't have a lot of excess to it. And just recently, there's been several web frameworks built in Go as well. On top of that, Google actually uses it for a lot of intercommunication, and having not that long ago released gRPC, which primarily they use with Go. So you're going to see a lot of startups using Go. You're going to see Google using Go, and you may also see a lot of companies that are heavily aligned with, say, Google's cloud operating system, because Go plays very well with that. But it is also supported by the Amazon framework. So with their CLI, you can write stuff in Go, which kind of shows you how it's risen in popularity. But being a fairly new language, and 2009 for programming languages that are popular is a fairly new language. It is a very up-and-coming language, and there's a lot of excitement about it. There are a lot of companies that are looking at it to replace their old aging systems with it. But you could also say that about other languages as well. But it is a highly promising language that has a lot of future in startups, in Silicon Valley, and in a lot of back-end stuff that may use AWS or cloud services as well. So you're not limited to just web development, and you're not limited to just back-end development with it. So there you go, a very broad strokes made with major generalizations, and I'm sure there's 100 exceptions that people will love to point out about, well, my company does this and we're not like this. With everything there are exceptions, but I hope that I gave you a good idea of what each programming language is and what kind of environment you can look to get into with it. If you have any questions, post in the comments, like and subscribe if you want. Hope to see you back next time. Thank you.